Think God can't use you? Think He only uses perfectly qualified people? Take a closer look. Moses was not a great speaker. Jonah ran from God. Jacob was a liar. Noah got drunk. Rahab was a prostitute. David had an affair. Jeremiah was depressed. A lot. Solomon was rich in wisdom, but poor in lifestyle. John the Baptist was just plain poor. Timothy was too young. Abraham was too old. Lazarus was dead. Sarah was barren. Naomi was a widow. Gideon and Thomas both doubted. So did Sarah. Peter lacked self-control. James and John were self-righteous. Paul had a short fuse. Well, so did Peter and Moses. Actually, lots of people did. God's army isn't perfect. It never has been. It's the march of the unqualified. Get in line.
All right, before I forget, I had one other announcement handed to me during the greeting, and that is Timmy Temez's graduation party will be June 3rd. We'll get more information in the next bulletin, but texted wanted us to make sure to announce that, so mark your calendars for June 3rd for that one as well. All right, now grab your Bibles, turn over to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. We are actually at the end of this sermon series. This is going to be the last sermon in this series as we've looked at different relationships Jesus had with different people. And hopefully one thing you've seen as we've gone through this is Jesus had relationships with a lot of different kinds of people. We live in a world that's very prone to create circles of influence, right? In crowd, out crowd. How many have ever been in the not in the in crowd? I'll say it that way. Anybody? Spent most of my life there, I think. Of course, it depends on the crowd, right? Whether you're in, whether you're out. Sometimes we think that that's just a school thing, a junior high, a high school thing. Not even. Adults are just as bad. In fact, they're worse because they pretend like they don't have the problem. At least high school kids know they have the problem of, popular kids, unpopular kids, all of that. But it goes all the way through. All of us at some point have probably felt like we were on the outside, looking in, wishing we could be part of that in crowd. Well, here's the thing. Jesus was both on the outside and the inside. But Jesus drew no lines. And one thing we have to think about when we stop to think about who Jesus was willing to have a relationship with, the answer is pretty much everybody. Anybody who was willing to have a relationship with him, he was willing to reciprocate. It didn't matter if they were popular, if they were acceptable, if they were whatever. It didn't matter. And today we're going to get sort of the ultimate example of that. Jesus is going to strike up a conversation with the ultimate outsider. So if you have your Bibles, turn to John chapter 4, and let's jump into this. John chapter 4, I'm going to start out in verses 1 to 9. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." All right, let's set the stage here. We talked at some point, I get confused what's sermon and what's class sometime, but in Jesus' day, you had Jerusalem and Judea. That was the southern part of the kingdom. You had the northern part, which is Galilee, up where Nazareth, where Jesus was originally from, Capernaum, all of that. In between those two regions, you had Samaria, the outcast, according to Jewish thought, the mongrel race. They were partly Jewish, they were partly Gentile. They had been completely mixed up and totally, well, again, by Jewish thought, adulterated during the Assyrian captivity. Assyria pulled half the Jews out, moved them elsewhere, moved in a lot of Gentiles. They intermarried. Their culture just sort of blended. So the Jews hated them. They couldn't stand them. A good Jew would not even go into Samaria. Now it says that Jesus left Judea going for Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria. The had in that statement is not, oh, that's just the way you get from Judea to Galilee. That was Jesus saying, no, I want to go through Samaria, because a good Jew would leave Jerusalem, head down to Jericho, cross the river Jordan, go up the east side of the Jordan, which was the tribe of Manasseh, and then when he got up to the mouth of the Jordan, he'd cross back over into Galilee. So he would never set foot on Samaritan soil. That was the normal way everything worked. But Jesus decided, nope, we're going straight up. So he goes into the area of Samaria. That rhymed. He goes into Samaria, and he's tired. It's about noon. He sits down at this well, and the lady comes out to draw water, because indoor plumbing did not exist then, obviously, right? But I want you to think about this. If you had to carry a big, probably 40, 50 plus pound jar of water, when would you normally do that? Would you schedule yourself to do that in the cool of the morning or in the heat of noon? That's not a hard question, guys. Come on. In the morning, never. Well, you might get thirsty. You do it in the morning. That's traditionally in societies like this. The women go to draw water from the well early in the morning when it's still cool, and they're going to need water all day long. So it actually says something about this lady that she's coming in the middle heat of the day. Why? Because she was an outcast among her own people. All right? Odds are she did not feel welcomed by the other women in her village. She was an outcast among outcasts. So she shows up at the well at noon. There's usually nobody here at this point. But there's Jesus sitting by this well. And she goes to start getting her water. And Jesus turns to her and says, hey, I'm thirsty. Will you draw me some water? And this floors the lady. Because she can look at Jesus, and by his dress, probably by his mannerisms somewhat, and by his accent, she can tell he's a Jew. Jews don't like Samaritans. We've already established that. Jews don't talk to Samaritans. And if you back up 2,000 years, a Jewish man didn't even talk to a woman who wasn't in his own house. All right? It was a different world back then. But here's Jesus talking to this Samaritan lady. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. That was not the normal, polite way society worked. So you had this weird interaction starting to unfold. Let's keep going. John chapter 4, verse 10. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him if he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman, let's keep going. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Now Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. I love that answer. Notice the question she asks. Jesus says, hey, will you draw me water? She goes, who are you to talk to me? This isn't the way this works. And Jesus says, if you knew who I really was, you would be asking me for water. Well, how can you do that? Are you greater than our father Jacob? Notice the Samaritans did call Jacob their father. This was where a lot of the animosity between Jews and Samaritans came from. Samaritans still trace their lineage back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Jews hated that because they were the only children as far as they were concerned. Oops, I went too far. So she asked him, who's greater? Now this is a very human question. And we use it to divide ourselves all the time. Who's the most important? Who's the most popular? Who's the wealthiest? The most influential? Who is greater? You or somebody else? And too often what happens is we want to clump together in groups and claim we're better than the other group. We do it all the time. We do it socially. We do it economically. We do it politically. We draw all these circles in the sand and say, if you're in my circle, we're better. If you're outside of my circle, well, then you're not as good as us. And we use it constantly to divide ourselves, to segregate ourselves. This is what Jesus is talking about, actually. When he says, hey, if you knew who I was, you'd be stepping into my circle. Because he is the greatest. The problem is he doesn't draw his circle the way everybody else does. His circle isn't drawn who's the most acceptable. Who behaves correctly? Actually, we're going to find out this lady definitely doesn't. Doesn't matter to Jesus. He's as accepting of her as he is of anybody else. In fact, if you back up in John a little bit, back to chapter 3, he has another long discussion with a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, a Jew among Jews, intelligent man, well-educated, lives a right life. But his conversation didn't go near as well as this lady's conversation did with Jesus. Why? Because he thought he was in the inner circle. And Jesus just doesn't operate that way. We worry about who's the greatest, who's the most important, who's on the inside, who's the most popular, all of that stuff. God only worries about one thing: who he is and who he desires to have with him. You know who that is? Another easy question, so I'm going to wait for an answer. Everyone. God desires all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of truth, of him. All right? That's where God draws his circle. And he is the greatest. Nobody ranks above him. All right? Nobody's more popular than God. I don't care what the polls say. God's the creator of the universe. He's the sustainer. He's everything. He's the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and end. I mean, there's no good way to describe God because God is beyond even any of our ability to describe him. So when we're looking for the in crowd, there's no one greater than him. But like I said, he doesn't draw his circle the way we do. Let's keep going a little bit farther in this. Look down, we're going to go to verse 16. He told her, "Go and call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is that you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim the place to worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied. Well, let me pause. When Jesus says woman, that's not the redneck version of that word. He means it as a term of respect. Okay? Just remember that. You got to clarify sometimes. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said, I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Notice this lady. Jesus says, I'll tell you what. Go call your husband, and we'll have this conversation. Oh, I'm not married. He goes, you're right, you're not at the moment, but you have been 5 times. Oh, and the guy you're with now isn't even your husband. So she did what any person would do. She deflected. Ooh, you're a prophet. Let me ask you a religious question and get the heat off of me. Y'all say we worship in Jerusalem. We say we worship on the mountain. So let me ask this theological question, and maybe it won't get so personal for me right now. But you know, she actually asked the perfect question. Who gets to approach God? Who gets to be in God's circle? And back then, this was a big source of contention between the Samaritans and the Jews. If you go back in their history, back to the original split, when Rehoboam did the things he did, and the nation split, and you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The king of the north set up a shrine in the north to keep the people from going back to Jerusalem for fear he would lose his kingdom. Well, that stuck, and it was still going on at that point. So there was this point of contention. Do we get to worship on the mountain in Samaria? Do we have to go to Mount Zion in Jerusalem and worship there? And this was the fight. And Jesus said, look, we worship the God we know. You Samaritans don't know him as well yet, but I will tell you this. A day's coming where the place isn't going to matter. You don't have to worship in Jerusalem. You don't have to worship in Samaria. There's going to be a time, and it's coming very quickly, where anybody who worships God, the requirement is in spirit and in truth, because God is spirit, and those are the people he wants. Now, a lot of times we get to this point, and that becomes the sermon. What does it mean to worship in spirit and in truth? I'm not going to do that today. I want us to stop and stay focused on this relationship, on this lady. All right? It's worth noting what is spirit and truth, absolutely. But beyond that, how does that give this woman, who's an outcast in her own people, who are outcasts to begin with, access to God? Now notice her response, right? She keeps it going. Remember, she doesn't want to focus on her anymore. It's getting a little too personal. So she goes, well, we believe that the Christ, the Messiah, the King. Notice that even that the Samaritans had in common with the Jews. They believed a king was coming, and they thought the king was going to be for them too. And again, this was a point of contention, a point of conflict between them, because the Jews thought, no, this is for us and us alone. That was Jesus' biggest conflict with them. That's why they nailed Jesus on a tree, because he wasn't going to be just their king. So she says, okay, when the Christ comes, he's going to explain this to us. And look what Jesus does. And do not underestimate this. He looks at her and says, I'm the one you're talking about. I'm him. I'm the king. I am the Christ. Now here's what I want you to understand. Go back and read all the gospel accounts up to this point. Jesus has said that to no one. Not even his apostles. Certainly not to the Pharisees, not to the Jewish leaders, not to the huge crowds of thousands and thousands of Jews who have followed him at different times. Not once has he stood up and said, hey, I'm the Messiah. But yet to the Samaritan woman at the well, he doesn't hesitate. She is the first person on earth to hear that part of the good news. Why would he do that? Maybe because he was trying to make a point. All of us who feel like we're on the inside with God need to realize there is no inside with God. There's God, His grace, and the rest of us. Yeah, there's some that accept His grace. There are some that reject His grace. But that doesn't change the reality of God's love for every single person. God doesn't look down on earth and say, well, you don't look right, you don't have enough money, you're affiliated to the wrong party, you group up with the wrong people, you work at the wrong job. You know, none of you are good enough to be in my circle. In fact, He looked at the whole world and said, I'll pay the price to put everybody in my circle. So the first person He announces it to is the last person you'd expect to be in His circle. So what does that mean for us? All right, let's go a little bit farther. I'm going to jump down. Actually, I'm going to start at verse 27. I'm not going to jump. Then Jesus, just then, I can't read. It's a problem. Just then His disciples returned and were surprised to find Him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Like I said, this was weird. So they all just sort of stood back. What's Jesus doing? Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out from the town and they made their way towards Him. Meanwhile, the disciples urged Him, Rabbi, eat something. But He said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then His disciples said to each other, could someone have brought Him some food? My food, Jesus said, is to do the will of Him who sent me and to finish His work. Don't you have a saying? It's still 4 months until harvest. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps, is true. I have sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. Let me back up. Think about what Jesus said there. I have sustenance you know nothing about. Now, y'all may be shocked to hear this. I like to eat. I enjoy it. A little too much sometimes, I think. But food is not what truly sustains us, is it? Because what happens after you eat? Well, first, if you're me, you feel miserable because you may have overdone it a little bit. Then after that, what happens? You get hungry again. Oh, a nap, true. And then you get hungry again. And then it starts all over. You know, the disciples come back, they've got some food, hear Jesus eat, and He goes, you know what? I'm good. I don't need this food now. Well, does somebody else bring you a sandwich? What's going on here? And He's like, no, I have sustenance. I have something that sustains me beyond what you understand. And that is doing the will of my Father. Now let me ask this question. What sustains us? What makes us feel complete, whole, nurtured, ready to face the world? I mean, we have to eat, yes. But I would argue what really makes a person feel ready for life is to make sure they have the same motivation God has. That's what motivated Jesus. Doing the will of the Father, reaching out to the outcast. Taking somebody that nobody else would have even ever talked to and confessing to her before anybody else that He was the Christ. And letting her know that salvation was for her every bit as much as it was for the Jews. Now here's the challenge. We still have the same problem today, in general. It is so easy for us as Christians to fall into the trap that church and God and Christianity is for good people. Small problem with that. None of us actually qualify. And if that offends you, good, think about it. Seriously, you're not that good. And I say that as somebody who's not that good. We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And by the way, all sin and fall short of the glory of God is not referring to something we did back when we were teenagers and we're now 50-something. That's talking about the life we live day to day. We all fall short. We all struggle. Maybe we don't do the same dumb things we did when we were younger. Hopefully we're growing. We get better in some ways. Some temptations we had when we were younger, we finally overcome them. We're doing better. But new ones always take their place. Arrogance is always a problem. Pride, greed, lack of humility. Those are sins. Every bit as much as adultery or drunkenness or anything else. We all sin. None of us are that good. That's not why we're here. Christianity is about the outcast coming to the Father. If we lose our identity as outcast, we forget what it means to be Christian. Because if we have a place, if we belong in this world, then we're not ready for God. If this world can sustain us, if this world can give us purpose, if this world gives us meaning, then we haven't found God's meaning. If I can look to the friends around me in society and say, hey, this is good enough, I have so overestimated my friends because they're not. God is the only one who's good enough. Remember back to the idea, who's the greatest? There's only one answer to that. Now, does that mean I don't make friends in the world? Does that mean that I don't associate with other people? Not at all. But it does change my reasoning for doing so. It's not to fit in. It's not to be popular. It's not to find my place. It's actually to go and do the will of my Father. To look at these people and say, hey, you may have a group, but it's not the group you need. The group you need is God's group, His church, His kingdom. The one place everybody belongs. And by the way, because it's not for good people, don't let anybody ever use the excuse, well, I just need to get my life together and then I'll show up at church. That is the lamest, dumbest, most backwards excuse there is. You don't get your life together and come to God. You come to God and He helps you get your life together. If you could do it yourself, you would have done it a long time ago. Otherwise, why are you waiting? How many of us have something in our life we would improve if we could? Now I can tell how many people are asleep. Good. All of us. If it was just a matter of wanting to be better, we would all be perfect. But we're not, are we? We all still struggle. That's okay. That's why God doesn't draw His circle the way everybody else draws the circle. God draws His circle and says, I don't care who you are, or what you do, step in. And once you're in, we'll work on it. Once you're in, I will help you be the person I created you to be. And you know what? Even after you're in the circle, you're still going to make mistakes. You're still going to sin. You're still going to fall down. You're still going to act like an outcast sometimes. That's okay. My grace is sufficient for you. We'll keep working on it. Now, for all of us who are in the circle, we now have one job. Help other people step into. Because they need that same hope. They need that same grace. They need to belong like we all need to belong. Why do we look for all these other groups? Social groups, political groups, activity groups, just all the different groups. Because by human nature, we know we're supposed to belong together somehow. But what we forget is there's only one place we truly belong, and that's with our Father. That's with our Lord. So at the end of this series, at the end of this sermon, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who I am. I can be rich, poor, short, tall, eloquent, bumbling, smart, not so smart. Doesn't matter. I have a place I belong. And I am an outsider. If you're not an outsider, you're not a Christian. Because this world right now actually belongs to somebody else. God's going to fix that. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it in the least. That's a done deal. It just hasn't happened yet. But if my place is in this world, I've got a problem. When God reclaims the world, I'm going to lose my place. However, if my place is with Him, then I've got nothing to fear. And it doesn't matter what you struggle with. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what your history is, what groups you belonged to before. None of that matters if you're willing to step into God's circle. Really think nailing him to a tree is going to take his life? No, the only reason it worked is he gave it willingly. In fact, look again at the scene of the crucifixion. When he gets to the end, he says, it's finished, and he gives his spirit up. Why did he do that? To let us go from being outsiders with God to being insiders, part of the group, part of the family. More than just a group, more than just a social circle. He says, no, now, when you step in this circle, you're family. You belong in ways that it's hard to even describe. Because family does for family. And if you didn't get anything else out of the sermon series, whoever we talked about, whether it was Jesus' brother and mother, whether it was Zacchaeus, whether it was the Pharisees, whoever it was, notice it always comes down to the same thing. With Jesus, you're family. Unless you choose not to be. So what's your choice? To be family or to choose a different family? Because other families fail. Jesus never does. If you're here this morning and you're not part of Jesus' circle, you haven't stepped into that circle, He paid the price. The only thing we're waiting on is you. All right? You don't got to get your life right. You don't have to fix your problems. You step in, and then that process begins. Or maybe for most of us here, the reality is we stepped in a long time ago, but we keep stepping out for these other groups and these other relationships. And we forget that this is the relationship that matters. Every other group is just an opportunity to make this group bigger. Maybe we need to refocus ourselves, to realize this is the answer to everything. We're going to have our song of invitation here in just a second. If you need to respond to Jesus' invitation, it's always open. You don't have to wait for me to stop preaching on a Sunday to respond. It's 24/7. Give me a phone call. You say, hey, I'm ready. I want to do this. We'll make it happen. Now's a convenient time, for whatever that's worth. But maybe you're also here this morning and you need somebody to pray for you because there's power in prayer. Because you've been on the outside too long. You need help staying focused on the inside. Well, as we sing this song, some of our shepherds will be in the back. Walk back and pray with them. That's why they're here. But for all of us, when we go out today, don't step out of this circle into another one. Take this one with you. And try to bring as many people in as possible. That's our job. Whatever needs you have this morning, whatever way we can serve, let us know while we stand and sing together.